Well, thank you very much. Obviously, you're a much tougher moderator than I was, but I think at this time of day, that's very much in order. Because we do have things to do. And here come my notes, so without a minute to spare. I guess I just, having listened to all the presentations of today, well, first of all, I have to start with a quick commercial. My company is Fleischmann Hillard. We're a global communications company that, as distinguished from a PR company, which I'll talk about in a second. But we have just launched an initiative, our global China practice, that is built to provide communication services to Chinese companies. And we have developed a brochure that is a kind of a longer version of my very short presentation today. I have a few here that I can give, and I will take business cards for anybody that wants it. It's called 8 Rules of Engagement on Chinese Investment Abroad. So anybody that's interested in that, I will give you what I have and send you what I don't. There's an expression in the U.S. that I don't know how well it will translate, but the expression is, if you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. And I think I had that in my mind while I was listening today, because almost every challenge and issue that came up that Chinese companies face going abroad represents a communications challenge. And as I said, we consider ourselves a communications company as opposed to a public relations company, mainly because public relations has taken on the connotation of spin and some kind of superficial gloss that is put on companies and what they do, whereas a communications company is designed to help other organizations, companies, better communicate with their key audiences. So that's how I would draw that distinction. And throughout the day, I've been hearing about cultural clashes, the foreignness liability, the political risk. All of these, I think, in some ways, can be couched as communications challenges. And when you think about Chinese companies coming to Europe, and this is probably even more the case in the US, but we're talking about Europe here today, the challenge also sort of is bound up in the image of China, in China Inc. And if I could go to the next slide, and I don't know if I have the device here or if I need them to move the slides. Hold the clock. So I don't know how to go to the next slide. Okay.
I don't know how to hold the clock.
This sort of illustrates the problem. This is a recent study by the Pew Foundation, a U.S. Very respected survey research company, that asked the question in various European countries, 1,000 respondents, is China's growing military might a good thing or a bad thing? And the yellow bar is bad thing. And I think that sort of captures the challenge that companies with a Chinese heritage face, that there is an element of fear in how they're perceived to the extent, whether they're state-owned enterprises or private, they're considered part of China Inc. and therefore evoke this kind of reaction in a lot of instances. And I think that I'm going to show a video that has been seen in the U.S. There's 2 million visits on YouTube. It is a really, and it's a fairly controversial and hostile to China. The interesting thing about this video is that it's about a domestic issue. This isn't even about a foreign issue, but it uses this scary image of China to leverage the public opinion on a domestic issue. And just so you know, while the language spoken in the video is Chinese with subtitles, that's exactly how it was broadcast to make it even more scary. So if you could just click on the video.
为什么强大的国家都会走向灭亡呢？古希腊、罗马帝国、不列颠帝国、美国，因为他们都犯同样的错误，与原来使得他们成功的原则背道而驰。美国政府企图以庞大的开支和税收来摆脱严重的经济衰退，巨额的所谓刺激开支。 庞大的医疗改革，政府接管私有企业，债务累累。当然，我们是他们的大债主。现在他们都得给我们干活。
You can't change the future. You have to. Join Citizens Against Government Waste to stop the spending that is bankrupting America.
So that shows the power of communications to demagogue and to leverage, and it also illustrates this kind of underlying fear that exists, certainly in the U.S. and by that last slide, to probably a lesser degree in Europe, and it is one of the challenges that companies face. On the other side, this is the same survey that asks the question, what do you think about China's growing economic power? And you see a very different picture, and you see that at least, except for France and to some extent Germany, people think it's more good than bad that China has growing economic power. And this was taken in July. I dare say, as people get educated on the ability of China to lift the global economy, if it chooses to do so, or, you could see even more favorable numbers. And the communications lesson from this is that when communicating broadly within a new market, you want to do so in ways that diminish the first reaction and enhance this reaction. And a lot of that was discussed earlier today in terms of job growth and economic development and kind of creating opportunities in communities where investments are made. So just kind of quickly going through some guidance. How much do I time?
2 minutes left.
Okay. We're going to go
including
through
the
this very quickly.
Including the extra time for setting up.
Oh, okay. This just kind of captures the way to think about it. You know, entering a new market is like moving into a new neighborhood, and you do all the same things. You get to know the neighbors, you find out who the vendors are that you can trust, you get to find out where the schools are, and you build a network and a constituency within that neighborhood to help you operate more favorably, to open up your ability to operate the way you want to do as a family. And if you really want to prosper, you take it to greater levels. You get to know the leaders of the mayor, the city council. And what that does not only is help you operate, but that when a threat comes, like when the federal government accuses you of bad things, you have a constituency that can protect you. In terms of how just general rules for guidance, and again, they're elaborated in this brochure, lack of communication feeds criticism and distrust. Transparency builds trust, and you got to do it right from day one. You want to have a balanced approach in terms of how your image is projected within a local market or local community. You don't want to hide the fact that you have a Chinese heritage, but you do want to expand the view so that you're seen as either more global or more local, depending on what the circumstances are. And you want to have authentic connections. This morning, Mr. Davies was talking about he said at one point, don't think you can get cover just by having your PR agency put out an annual report on CSR. I totally agree. That it has to be authentic, it has to be genuine, and then have your PR agency communicate something that's real. And then the tone to take is a tone of confidence without bragging, to put it bluntly. I think Chinese companies have a right to be very confident. They have had tremendous achievements globally, locally and globally, and they have a right to be confident, but to the extent that they're seen as overbearing, it tends to stimulate opposition, and so you have to strike that right tone to make sure you don't generate your own opposition. This is a slide that is way too complex to do in the 30 seconds I have left, but if somebody wants to talk about it, I'll be happy to talk about it. It's just the various channels by which you communicate, and with that, I will conclude.
Thank you very much indeed. And congratulations for a miracle of compression, which even included a video. So I think that's a pretty hard act to follow. Jeremy's going to be next. So if you'd, I'll just mention very briefly that you've organised Standard Chartered not just in Switzerland, but I understand in the whole of Europe. And before that, Jeremy worked in Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, and even London. So with that, I'll start.
Thank you very much, Ken.
You'll start.
Just before I get into the topic itself, on that communication point, it strikes me that in the title of this entire event, there are some major communication issues, one of which is what does the word Inc. mean these days? Because when Vice Minister Chen was talking to us earlier on, he talked about not only state-owned enterprises, but also the private sector. So a lot of people will think Inc. means China, the state-owned enterprise mass, but actually we're talking about overall Chinese investment outside China. And the second one, of course, is the concept of global. These days, global is not so fashionable, actually, as a concept. You look at what's happened since the financial crisis in 2008. Even our arch rival HSBC have stopped being global, actually, if you look at what they're doing recently in the US or what they're doing recently in Korea. So when we talk about global, I'm thinking mainly, how does China take itself outside the Asian sphere and invest appropriately in the broader international sphere? And I say that because China, and I know this from personal experience, has a substantial track record of successful collaboration and investment in Asia. So I'll take it in that context. And as I just talked briefly about Standard Chartered's own experiences in China, I think you'll find there's a number of lessons from what we've learned in operating in China that are equally relevant for Chinese enterprises looking to invest outside China. Very briefly, Standard Chartered actually opened its first office in China in 1858. So we may actually count as one of the longest, if not the longest, consistent investors in China. And we actually stayed open throughout every single phase of China's development from then on, at which the low point was one Scottish individual sitting in Shanghai for a period of time, totally out of communication with the rest of the world. But he stuck it out, and that's nothing to do with the weather in Scotland, I might add, if anyone has any concerns about that. We now have 72 outlets across China. We employ 5,000 people, and we made a conscious effort to integrate locally as closely as possible through multiple strands, of which many are also very relevant as China invests outside China. I'd take one particular one, which is the investment in people. And we currently have, over the last 3 years, taken on 250 Chinese graduates who are studying with us both in China, but also, most importantly, abroad in our outlets in 70-odd other countries. And within China itself, we also have 22 different nationalities working. So a key point from that, of course, is that if you want to go global or international, then you definitely need to not only look after your local talent base and nurture it, but also integrate it with your international talent base. Additional to that, we ran a very strong sustainability program in China. And the main one that we operate there was called Seeing is Believing, and we still run it globally, actually, throughout all of our operations. And that's about curable blindness. And a number of the projects are actually in China. And so we've actually raised enough money now to cure, so far, nearly 3 million people who would otherwise have remained blind. And the plan now is to cure another 7 million people out to the year 2020. And that captures the imagination of our local staff, and it works incredibly powerfully in every single country where we operate. So I think there's a very strong lesson there in terms of sustainability/community engagement. And that actually is a huge uniter of our people. The power that has in terms of bringing people together is enormous. We also do a number of big collaborations, and one of the previous speakers talked about the concept of partnering, joint venturing, and setting up operations in collaboration with local firms. So we've done that with Bohai Bank in Tianjin, where we have 19.99%, and we're doing it right now with Agricultural Bank of China, where we went in as a cornerstone investor with around $500 million invested. And we now act as their strategic partner as they pursue Chinese enterprises as they go international. And that makes it much easier for us to do business with them. In terms of development since then, because this session is primarily about the way forward and addressing priority issues, I would say that as enterprises look outside, there's a whole range of new trends that need to be taken into account. The first one is the internationalization of the renminbi, which actually is good news for Chinese enterprises. That is actually at a fairly early stage of evolution, but it is a clear trend that is driven around trade flows, but will gradually move out into broader investment flows. It's also about the sheer size of China's reserves. And if you look, for example, at the role that Chinese sovereign wealth funds had back in the late 2007, 2008 period, where they were seen almost as pariahs, these days, of course, Chinese investment at that level is much more broadly welcomed as a result of the financial crisis. A third issue would be around and it's come out a couple of times today already, is around domestic demand and how that plays out in terms of the collaboration that Chinese enterprises do offshore that they can bring back onshore into China as domestic demand goes up and as consumers grow. And then, of course, when we look outside of China itself in terms of those themes, you have the new global reality, which is around the regulatory environment on banks. And that, of course, is going to make it much more expensive to take down pure bank debt as a result of increased regulatory burden, increased capital requirements, etc. And that eventually, although there isn't a level playing field at the regulatory level as yet, that will doubtless have a knock-on effect on pricing when it comes to Chinese banks supporting Chinese enterprises abroad, as well as international banks supporting Chinese enterprises abroad. And I think that global reality of, a much more complex, much more demanding regulatory environment on the banks will, of course, make it, at the debt financing level at least, much more difficult for Chinese enterprises to get funds. But the good news, of course, is that all banks want to continue to do business in China. It is absolutely without doubt that all banks, even big international banks who are currently constrained in different ways domestically, are still focused on the East, and in particular on how they can build their business in China. So in terms of themes, I would say the new global reality will impact how Chinese enterprises can operate overseas. On the positive side, they have a terrific opportunity. I think that most companies in China have the opportunity to collaborate successfully with foreign enterprises, and I would agree that that, for me, is the most powerful way forward. I'm done. How about that? I've even beat your clock.
You've beaten the clock by a minute. So, congratulations. We're actually going down, so each speaker will reduce by one. No, sorry, only joking. And actually, you would have been second, so you're okay. So, nextly, I'd like to introduce Tony Chung of Huawei, who was previously with Nortel. And that's all I'm going to reveal, because any more, and he'll do it himself. And as you've noticed, we're keeping strictly to 8 minutes. And I'll warn you 2 and 1 minute before the end. Okay? So please take it from there.
大家好，我今天很荣幸能在这里和大家一起分享一下华为在过去的几年里面在欧洲和在瑞士的一些拓展的经验。实际上在今年已经是华为在欧洲的第10年。10年前我们从10个人开始，到现在我们整个在华为欧洲大概有5000多人。那么大家都会就是说我们走出来比较早的中国企业。那么我们在这个期间，我们有什么样的经验可以共享给大家？那么我想从我个人角度来讲，我觉得在这个10年里面的欧洲的这个拓展的过程，实际上也是一个建立信任的一个过程。所以今天我这边主要从几个方面来讲一下，就是说是怎么样的经验，我们在一个陌生的市场建立一个 trust。从我们刚到一个新的国家、新的市场，大家都觉得这是一个很陌生，所以这个陌生这个词，大家觉得是非常挑战的一个事情。但是我想，同时正因为陌生，所以呢有新鲜感，有好奇心，所以想这也是一个好的一个机遇的一个方面。打个比方说，我们在3年前我们刚到瑞士，实际上我们谁也不认识。那个时候我们就借用了我们中国积累了那么多年的那个优秀的文化，那我们就跟客户，我们不讲 business， 我们讲 culture， 所以我们跟很多的瑞士人去介绍什么是中国的文化，什么是中国的方式。打个比方说，这个你们叫2，在中国就叫8，是吧？那很多的事情，他们对他们讲很新鲜。那么他有了新鲜感，有好奇心，他才会比较 open 的来跟你去谈生意。所以我想，怎么去用这个文化来这个做生意，我想是一个非常好的一个经验。这里面我们举办了很多这个文化的一些 event。然后呢，第二个呢，我想介绍的就是说，正因为中国离大家比较远，尤其离欧洲、离瑞士，飞机都要飞10几个小时。那么我们请你们去中国去看一下，你们可能对中国都不了解，那你怎么有这个信任对中国公司有了解呢？所以我们请了很多的我们的 VIP 的客户，包括瑞士的官员去中国去访问中国，去访问我们华为的在深圳总部。我觉得这也是一个很好的方式，让大家知道什么是中国的企业。 然后呢，另外呢，就是因为华为我们是做这个技术的，所以我们在这里面，同时我们也和当地的客户和这个学院，我们去办了很多这个 joint venture， 这种技术的研发中心。那么这样的话，我们就把这个技术带到了这边瑞士，带到了客户的身边。那么客户可以去很容易的地方，去米兰、去英国、去很多这个地方，去根据他所需要的技术，可以去看，可以去考察。这样的话呢，可以大大的缩短这个客户认知你的技术，来认可你的这个 capability 的这个方式。然后呢，我这边还会讲，就是说因为在每个本地的市场都会有很多这个本地的一些平台，一些大家沟通的一些机会，那么我们也积极的参与到本地的一些活动中去。那么这样的话呢，也进一步让大家知道你是做什么的，你是在这个行业里面是一个什么 position， 然后你能在这个本地市场你能带来什么。然后最后呢，我们想这个就是说，你作为一个公司，作为在一个新的市场，那么就是说你公司的 image 也非常重要。那么我们除了我们赚钱以外，我们也知道怎么去在本地市场我们应该花的钱。我们去做更多的一些公益的活动，让大家知道我们在这个地方做生意，我们在这个地方赚钱，但是我们也非常感谢本地的这个良好的环境。所以我这边简单的分享了几个方面，可能因为不同的行业，可能这个背景 business model 可能不一样，但是我希望我今天呢介绍的几个方面，能给大家有一些启示，能够在中国企业在瑞士这个市场，或者说在欧洲市场拓展的时候，能够有更多的这种方式去缩短这个建立信任的关系。那么我想有了这个信任的话，那么大家做生意就是非常顺利，非常顺理而章的。好，谢谢。
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 4.5 minutes. So you get the prize, by the way. But actually, the prize is for all of you, because it means there will be a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So that's why we're doing this. This isn't a parlour game. It's got a serious purpose. Okay. Nextly, I'd like to invite Romain Vanoli to speak. Romain is a member of the executive management for Aon Risk Solution, and he's going to speak from the rostrum. And you need the remote. Okay.
Green next.
And we have the presentation. Okay. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much. I'll try to stick to the, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to try to stick to the timing. Aon is a global, first a couple of words on my company. Aon is a global consultant in risk, insurance, and human capital. I'm a member of the executive management for the Swiss, and also member of the board of the Swiss operations. As a global company, we do conduct surveys on a regular basis on risk management, and this is what I would like to present you now. Okay, so the Aon Global Risk Management Survey is a survey which is conducted throughout the world. The last one, which has been issued a couple of weeks ago, has been run with about 1,000 corporate companies in 58 different countries. So this gives us really a broad overview on how risks are felt and identified in different corporations. So it is more a view from the really from the playground than any academic view on risk management. So this is why I'll try to give you this view on that. When Aon does this, we cover following topics: the top risk concerns facing companies today, how companies do identify and assess their risks, the way they do organize their risk management, and who is involved within the company and how are insurance markets responding to companies, because the insurance markets are part of the risk management, being the risk transfer to the insurance companies. If you look at the top ranking for the last survey we made throughout the world, you see that this is the list of the top 10 risks that have been brought by our customers and by our respondents. You see that the economic slowdown, the regulatory legislative changes,
and increasing competition are really the top 3 risks that have been identified. Interestingly, the first 3 ones are really ones where companies have a limited control over that. They can obviously prepare themselves. They can try to cope with this risk as much as they can, but it is not a risk which is inside the company, so it makes it a bit more difficult in these times to face these challenges of the economy. Going further on the top 10 risk ranking, you can. What we also see is that the economic slowdown, which ranks number 1, isn't changed since 2009. So when we conducted the last survey in 2009, we were already within the crisis, within the overall crisis. So it's not very surprising. What we will see is how things are going. Will probably develop within 1 or 2 years' time. The economic slowdown is still there, so we'll see how respondents are going to react on the next one. Regulatory and legislative changes are still ranking number 2, and they were also ranking number 2 years ago. So it is really a risk which is on the top agenda of risk managers and company leaders. And for the first time, the failure to innovate or meet customer needs, as well as the IT risk, the technology failure, or system failure, entered the top 10 ranking. They were previously on number 15, on position 15 and 14 in year 2009. When we ask risk managers and company leaders about their risk ranking, we also ask what is their risk readiness to cope or to control these risks, and what are the losses they've been suffering in the past from these various risks. So we see that the risk readiness is at the highest for cash flow and liquidity risks now in 2011, and the respondents feel least ready for failure to attract or retain top talents, which is a risk which is also soaring, generally speaking. And from the losses that companies have been experiencing on a global basis, the economic slowdown obviously ranks first, and it is followed by commodity price and increased competition. So that's where really companies reported to have been suffering the major losses within the last 2 years. Going further on identifying, measuring and managing risks, the companies are still facing increasing pressure to identify, to quantify, and to manage their risks within the companies. When you ask respondents what are the top benefits they feel to invest in risk management, most of them do answer that this helps to make clear and informed decisions on risk taking or risk retention within their balance sheets, and then obviously on lowering their total cost of risk as the 2 top benefits. Very interestingly, senior management's intuition and experience remains really the primary method used by all survey respondents to identify and assess major risks. This is very interesting because this is obviously something which is existing for decades and decades, the senior management's intuition. But on the other side, obviously, this primary method is obviously supported now by structured risk tracking and risk measurement in larger companies. In smaller companies, it remains the top, really, the top
2
method
minutes
used.
left, by the way.
Yep. Then on reporting, organization of risk management and reporting, the boards of the companies are still really the oversighting and managing risk. It remains really firmly on the agenda. Despite the economic slowdown, this is an interesting view as well, is that the levels of risk management department staffing didn't reduce, have been reduced through the economic slowdown. They remain stable, which is a good news as well. And a couple of words on the insurance markets and risk financing. The financial stability is really the key criteria to an organization which chooses an insurance company, and not only the competitive pricing. Prompt settlement of claims, of large claims, is really a top issue as well, and consideration for choosing an insurance. We're still, since 2004, in soft insurance markets, so this is to the benefit of the buyers, obviously. And most of the organizations do control on a central basis the buying of their insurance. So there's only 3% of surveyed companies which allow local organizations, branches or affiliates to buy their own insurance on a freely basis. A couple of learnings on captives, which are still used as a central tool for risk management within companies, and their numbers stay stable over time. And as a conclusion, risk retains still a high position in all the agendas of the companies. It is obviously hard to predict which risk may emerge, but you can make lots of prediction for risks which are known or which have a certain loss experience in the past. It's very difficult to predict what is going to be the next black swan. Obviously, if you have a wait-and-see approach, it will be difficult to cope with the next coming risks. And the last series of major catastrophic events that we've seen in the first semester of this year will probably impact and change the priorities we've seen in the risk ranking in our last report. We'll probably see risks like distribution of supply chain of failure or business interruption, political risk maybe take a rise in the top risk ranking in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Hans Roth, the advisor for Asia to the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, who is a career civil servant who spent most of his professional life in Japan and China. And by the way, China includes quite recently, I think about 5 years in Hong Kong.
That's right.
So, Hong Kong, China, as we call it internationally. Okay, so without further ado, I'll ask you to be our last speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to go on a little bit into the question of risk and risk assessment. We have started with it to some extent this morning. The predecessor has talked a lot about it. I would like to enlarge the subject a little bit, coming away from the risk literature, political risk, which is usually directly linked to the financial part in a company. In my understanding as a diplomat and a social scientist, political risk includes risks that come out of the body politic and cover all fields of business activities, and the body politic understood in the old Greek sense of polis, the city, the society as a whole. So if you look at political risks in a social sense, let me see, it doesn't work here. So the Greek understanding of society, basically. So what are risks in a social sense? I think they have a general influence on your investment. Let's have a short look, for instance, at the basic legal framework. The legal framework can change from one moment to another due to social factors. The influence of newly implied middle classes in a government that hasn't taken account of them before. Look at the Arab world now. Tunisia, Egypt, the middle class will come in and it will have different ideas about the legal framework. So a change of leadership can lead to an immediate change of the legal environment. Foreign perception plays a role as well. We have heard this 2 or 3 times. Both Bill Black and Tony Chung have underlined how local trust of a company plays an important role. So building up this trust is exactly the same as what our Swiss companies do in China. You have to keep contact with the local governments. You have to build up a trust network in your place. What hasn't been mentioned so far, in my view, is also your own legislation might have an impact on international acceptance. If China protects its state-owned enterprises for security reasons, it doesn't have to be surprised that other countries are building up obstacles for investment abroad for the same kind of reasons. So if you look at englobing risk management, perception, assessment, management and avoidance, all this is actually very strongly linked to the different social environment. Different value patterns, individualistic societies like the one we have in Switzerland or in England, and the collective societies on the other hand, the position of the individual is different, the role of the government is different. In a collective society like the Chinese, the citizen hasn't taken the independence we have in Enlightenment. So the government is actually taking the supreme role of guaranteeing the social interests, and it is accepted as that. On the other hand, you have an obligation of the individual to the group or to the company that is completely different to an individual society. So this has an influence on macro and micro management very directly. You have, for instance, a clear differentiation. Asian countries would look at the future in a visionary view, not linked with the present. Whereas we have in our planning process a very linear development. We want to open a company in 2 years' time, we look at all the information from here to there. Whereas they look at first, where do we want to be in 2 years' time, without taking the present into account. And this has the interesting implication Dr. Chen Hui has mentioned this morning on the contract. You have to know, if you are writing a contract in a European environment, how the things are going to look in the 3 years' time the contract is going to last. You are not able to change the contract at every moment of time. So you have to get into a planning process in a Western way, and probably you are having some difficulties with that. I'm just looking at the building up of this seminar. It's very short term. That's why no other government official is here. So if you ask somebody to participate 6 days before the event, it's very difficult to convince people to come because they planned it longer ahead. The influence on risk patterns on an individual level, the risk proneness is very important. Take the case of Nick Leeson and the Barings Bank in Singapore. I think if you have somebody who goes to the risk limits in a European environment, he has to go over them in an Asian environment, otherwise he doesn't even get into the market. How are you controlling this different assessment of risks in a different cultural environment will become a very important element. So to these social or risk levels on the social level, you have the risk on a personal level. Risk depends on the individual, on his society. Risk depends on age. Risk depends on gender. So risk is very clearly cultural. So when I sum up, I would say that political risk management, you have to look at it on a national and on a regional level, on a macro-social and macroeconomic level. Change of leadership can be a problem. Changing social conditions will lead to different risk assessment, and the social value patterns in different cultures are playing a key role as well. So the management of social relations, the management of relations with the local governments become key issues, and I'm very happy to see that the Chinese companies like Huawei are exactly on the same course as our Swiss companies are in Chinese environment.
2 minutes.
So on the management of the company, and this is the micro level, financial risks, business risks, quality risks, security, HR and reputational are very important, especially the security risks. The management of multi-ethnic teams is not an easy thing. You're not dealing with your Chinese employees the same way you're dealing with your Swiss employees, for instance. So you have to make a distinction in the same kind of teams. And if you make mistakes, if you dismiss somebody in an unorderly way, you might have very strong drawbacks, especially nowadays where people have no hesitations to go into the internet, to go on Facebook with the critiques towards the company. So these kind of risks become a real problem in an intercultural environment, and more so. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to congratulate our speakers who've managed to get us back on course. We're supposed to be finishing this at 17:45, in other words, we have 7 minutes left, but I've been told we're allowed to have a few minutes more for discussion. We've had a lot of very rich content. Everybody actually finished well within the time. will the PowerPoints all be available on the website? They will. Okay, so we haven't actually heard every single thing on the PowerPoints, and if you haven't had time to take notes, don't worry, you can get all of them on the website. Now I'd like to ask for questions. What we'll do is we'll take 3 or 4 questions in the order that I see people, and if I see somebody after and they weren't, and they were really first, then I'm sorry, but that's how it's going to be. Yes, I've seen one there, but 1, 2. Hold on. What I'd like you to do is to identify yourself. You don't have to say how thankful you are to be here. We know that, and try and make it a question, not a contribution. If you want to have a long discussion, you're welcome to do that afterwards. So we have number 1, 2, 1 over there, 2, 3, 4.
My question is very simple, but I'd like to give you a little bit of context. First of all, Fleischmann Hillard, back in '97, sponsored and partnered with one of the most successful cross-cultural and cross-communication conferences known as LISA. Standard Chartered Bank, on or around the same time, took the risk and I believe reaped considerable rewards for implementing the first financial portal in Chinese, Korean, and Japanese language. Okay? And Nortel, Huawei, longtime supporters and understanders, okay, of cross-cultural and cross-communication disciplines have implemented or tried to implement considerably robust communication strategies for their respective organizations. The temptation with 6 of you as board members or very highly positioned in management was too great not to ask this question. And please answer it as briefly but as poignantly as possible. So A, and yes, excuse me, thank you, Mr. Roth, for highlighting the risks and the importance of cultural understanding, okay, at every level of business. So, again, A, in your respective companies, are these communication issues being tabled at the board level? And secondly, are your respective companies prepared to invest more in issues like or addressing cross-cultural and cross-language communications?
Thank you very much. The second question was actually all the way over here.
Quan Li, Texas A&M. So I think throughout, I'm sorry I missed the first half of this panel, but throughout this panel and many other panels, and I think the message is very consistent that the firms, they want to do well abroad, they need to engage the local government, the host country government. I wonder whether there's something very puzzling here. One thing is that I wonder whether we have a selection bias that firms who come here are successful firms. So they all do that. But actually in the World Bank Enterprise Survey of firms in 88 countries, that you observe that most of the firms, when they ask the question, do you lobby the government to solve your problem? I say no. Given all kinds of possible bias, why they didn't want to answer the question and all that, but most of, taking those into consideration, most of them don't. And many of them, of course, fail. So based on your experience, what are the factors that prevent firms, okay, when you operate abroad, from engaging the host government and work with them and lobby them and try to change things? Thank you.
Okay, third one was right all the way back again. Lady over there.
A very quick question. One of my clients recently decided not to go forward with the signing of one of their major contracts with a very powerful Chinese counterparts. It happened to be that there has been headlines about this very powerful Chinese company, Costco, who have been default unilaterally on several payments to their foreign counterparts about the leasing of the boats. So I wanted to ask the panel if you have any advices to both sides in terms of Costco in this case, as the Chinese company, very powerful one, and also the foreign company, the shipping company, how are they going to deal with it?
Thank you. Was there one more? Okay, in that case, we'll go straight to the answers. And actually, the first question was mentioning several people on the panel, but really, I think addressed to everybody. Are these common issues tabled at the board level? And is your company going to invest more in dealing with these cross-cultural issues? Now then, let's see who will ask. Okay, Jeremy.
Yeah, I'd be delighted just to share a couple of insights on that. Yes, the answer is communication around the company is absolutely a key board agenda item, and that's because Standard Chartered operates in 72 countries worldwide, and we don't have a big home base actually, so communication is fundamental. So how do you get the message across? Well, we created a number of straplines, if you like. It began with, we want to be the world's best international bank, and the new one that we launched last year is called Here for Good. That's actually a really dangerous one to launch, because you can imagine how you could go wrong with that. You know, in the event you did something wrong in one country and somebody decided to make a big fuss about it, then you know you're not there for good, right? Or maybe you exit a country, you're not there for good. So we took a very bold step, and that was a decision by the board, and the whole company, groups around that statement, and that actually underpins everything that we try to do, and that connects through to the values the company has as well. So this becomes the glue that holds the company together, and without that, if you're a big international group like we are, you're actually going to fail, because you'll have people totally off message, people having a different idea about what strategy is, different idea about what matters to the company. So absolutely board level, and absolutely we invest more in it.
Anybody else? Bill?
Yeah, and I actually mentioned at the beginning of my remarks that Fleischmann Hillard is just launched. And first of all, I need to talk to you, because that event you referred to was before my time, and I'd love to hear more about it. But we just launched what we call the Global China Practice that involved a fairly large commitment of resources of the company, including the writing of this brochure, which I'll promote again. And obviously the transportation of me coming to this meeting. So I think that is the best tangible evidence that my company is very much mindful of the cross-cultural challenges and places we can help. This I don't even think is public, so don't anybody say anything outside this room, but we're about to do a similar kind of thing with an Islamic practice, and to kind of demonstrate bring to bear our resources within that world, and try to handle some of those cross-cultural issues. So again, the short answer is yes, and my presence here, I think, might be evidence of it.
Tony?
Okay. Yeah, actually, in my organization, we also have the local team and some people from China. But I think the important thing, you should have a very good, just one team, because, for example, the common language also is very important. In my office, with some local people, they speak German, and also Chinese people speak Chinese. But all the meeting and also even the meeting minutes, we also force all the people in English. So if you can have a good organization, and also all the people know what is the common language and how to communicate on the daily job, also would be very important. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, if nobody else wants to comment on that, I'll move to question 2, which is on this very difficult one of how you engage the host country government or the local government, how you work with those. What factors does the panel think are preventing firms from doing this, or doing it properly, or doing it successfully? Does that catch what you want to know? Okay. Hans, please, first, then Bill.
I think one of the first questions is that a business actor doesn't put the priority on the government action. And it doesn't always have a positive effect. If, for instance, you do some troubleshooting as a consul general in Shanghai, the local government might not like that very much. So you intervene, you intervene on a very low level. So if the company comes with a problem, contacts you to help, then I wouldn't, on the highest level, contact the local government. I would just have a Chinese employee call the local government agency responsible and ask about the problem. This is very often already sufficient. You don't have to act further. Because if the government gets involved in a troubleshooting, the company loses a lot of flexibility. It gains in weight, but it loses in flexibility. So economic actors that feel comfortable in a different cultural environment, they would usually not go to their government first for help. They would try to do it on their own. This is one issue. The second is, I think in a Western environment where the government role is different, is not as important in economic activity as you would think in a Middle Eastern or in an Asian environment. The contact with the government, especially with the higher levels of government, the regional rather than the local government, is not that important. Whereas in a country like China, the local contact plus the higher level contacts are very important. You have to really look after all the levels. But even then, some Swiss companies would come and ask, well, do you think it's necessary to do? I would say, yes, of course. As soon as you run into trouble, you need the help of the government. How far you go with that is another question. And let me probably even go one step further into the third question, the Foxconn case. I think the Foxconn case is not a case as long as it's a national Chinese issue. But the moment egotistic company interests start to dominate the international scene, this has an international backlash on the whole country. So there I feel this is the biggest problem the Chinese government might have. How are we disciplining our companies that the national Chinese interests are not damaged because of egotistic company interests? This for me is by far the biggest problem, because the in-group feeling in a collective society is very strong. The out-group is not taken into account, and that in the international sphere is a real problem.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, I'll just give an anecdote. I met with the chairman of a company about 3 years ago, a large Chinese company that was going global, was pretty much global, and was trying to move into the U.S. And we and my team presented the kind of guidance I think we've all agreed is appropriate here in terms of how you build relationships within that new market, and you do it systematically, and you reach out to various constituencies. The reaction I got was fairly negative, because the view of this company was they were a business-to-business vendor. They didn't have consumer products. Oh, and by the way, the example we always use is Japan. I mean, in Japan, first, Sony and Toyota first came to the U.S., there was a great hostility, and now they're fully accepted brands within the U.S., and there is no controversy except when the cars the brakes don't work. But that's a recent development. But we use that example, and the response back was, well, we're not a consumer brand, so we don't have to talk to all these other stakeholders. We only have to talk to our customers. And as long as we're providing good products at good value, we've done all we need to do. There was no sense of this broader requirement to communicate. So I think that's part of what what we find anyways. And I think this company has now become much more sophisticated and has had greater success. But that was, I think, companies following on start with that presupposition that they don't have to communicate broadly. And to Hans's point, I mean, in the U.S., it's as crystal clear how Chinese companies need to sort of build their constituencies, and you do start local. And you can see it just in, my colleague Huawei is constantly getting badgered by the people at the national level, senators writing letters and various things being hostile. Meanwhile, there are vast numbers of governors and mayors who are right now traveling to China to try to generate inbound investment into their communities. So at the local level, they see the benefits very tangibly in terms of employment and economic development. At the national level is where you see those national security issues that tend to sort of trump that. And so I do think that there is a very systematic way to build that up. Now, Huawei has made a breakthrough in a way, because there's a very popular video on YouTube of Governor Rick Perry singing the praises of Huawei. He's a very conservative Republican. And he is talking about how his Mr. Ren, the chairman, reminds him of his father. So there are some exceptions to every rule.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, just a quick word on Standard Charter's approach. I mean, government relations are, again, they're pretty fundamental to the company, and you can imagine in the current context of regulatory turmoil how important it is to be able to have a dialogue with government and so forth. And I think the question was around what sort of gets in the way or maybe sub-optimizes that process, and I'd just share with you 3 thoughts. Number one, it very often pays off to have an advisory board or similar made up of people who have access in the first place. Number two, it's an extremely good idea to hire very competent locals who in turn will be able to advise you better and maybe get you access or guide you through the labyrinth that you may be presented with in a given new country. And the third one, of course, is to keep your senior management, particularly if they're non-locals, in place for longer, so they have more of a chance to build relationships and have real access and credibility and build that trust that's so important to be able to have a meaningful dialogue with government.
Thank you very much. Now, we are almost ready to go and have something to eat and some cultural entertainment, but we're going to finish with the Costco deal, and please keep this extremely brief. You know, try and be like Confucius, just a few characters, and talk about the general principle rather than individuals, obviously. Okay, who would like to start on that? Tony? No. No, nobody wants to touch this one. Nobody?
I can have one.
Okay,
because
Hans, you can actually have the last word. We can talk about engaging with government. So
I didn't show the last slide because it ends with a negative tone, but I can read the first part. The risk management in different social environments is a management of intercultural risk, from the government framework to the micromanagement of personnel, every level being equally important. I think that would be my message.
Thank you very much. That was absolutely perfect and apt for the case. So I'd like you to thank, in the usual way, these brilliant members of the team who've managed to get everything done so perfectly.
And thank you also to Ken for his masterly management of the panel. Thank you all to all the panelists, and indeed thank you to all the presenters today and to all of you for your kind attention. We heard a great deal of rich material today from Vice Minister Chen, informing us about the 12th five-year plan, and extensive discussion on all aspects of risk. Risk in terms of the international context, risk in terms of specific business risks in relation to labor, in relation to business risk, political risk. We really explored risk and challenges to Chinese businesses seeking to internationalize, and also indirectly to businesses seeking to invest into China today. I hope that as in every business transaction and as in every business investment, risk and challenge is matched by return. Tomorrow we will have an equally extensive and enlightening discussion on the matter of opportunities and sort of the positive look. Thank you all again. I invite you to join us in a reception outside and some music. Thank you.
Okay.